welcome you to this celebration of 75th birthday of Alexander Schnirelmann. The actual birthday will be tomorrow. So Sasha's contributions mostly can be put in two main broad areas, geometric hydrodynamics and quantum chaos. So today we have two lectures mostly devoted to hydrodynamics. Tomorrow there will be two more lectures devoted to properties of eigenfunctions and Sasha's remarks and a banquet. So let me ask everyone to mute yourself, and I would like to introduce our first speaker, Jan Brinier from École Normale Supérieure in Paris, and he will talk on various formulations and approximations of incompressible fluid motion in porous media. Jan, welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Boris, for the introduction. And I am very pleased and honored by this invitation. And let me just tell straight that I have the greatest admiration for Sasha and his mathematical work. And this is okay. So let me start my talk. Um, so I will discuss what I call the Muscat system, which is also known as the incompressible porous medium equation, which rules the motion of an inhomogeneous incompressible fluid driven by a potential phi through a porous medium. So the basic equation, the simplest model, is given by the following formula. So you have a density field denoted by rho, which is advected by a velocity field, which is divergence free, V. And this divergence free is actually related to the density field by this very simple formula. V is the projection of minus rho grad phi onto the space, the L2 projection onto divergence free fields. So for instance, you can observe that if rho is a constant, so if you have a homogeneous fluid with constant rho, then the projection would be the projection of minus grad phi, and therefore we will get 0. So if there is no inhomogeneity in the model, there is no motion. So the inhomogeneity of the fluid is very important to drive the system. So the potential is typically the gravity system. In the simplest situation, we can consider that grad phi is just the constant along the vertical axis. So I would make some connection with some various mathematical things. So if you look carefully at the work of Felix Otto, you see that his gradient flow theory, which was very successful, started really with this kind of models. So it was very inspiring for Felix Otto. And also more recently, there was a lot of interest for this model by people like Laszlo Szekely, coming from the convex integration approach that will be discussed by the next speaker, Camilo De Lelis. And just consider, I would just make a comment about the name I gave to the Muscat system. So I gave the name Muscat system. It's a little bit wrong because the Muscat problem rather refers to a geometric evolution equation for some interface, for instance, studied by Daniel Cordoba and collaborators. And okay, so you might discuss the name. Muscat was an engineer in the petroleum industry. And but the name is nice because it is reminiscent of a very nice drink, the Muscat. So I like the name. Anyway, so let me move to the next slide. So actually, it is, in my opinion, it is even simpler to write these systems in Lagrangian coordinates, or if you prefer, material coordinates. And if I describe the fluid motion by the position of fluid particles denoted by x sub t of A at time t and for the label A, and the label A is typically the initial position of the particle. then you can write the system in the following way. It's just an ODE driving the position of the particle. So you have the first term, minus rho 0 of A, refers to the initial density field evaluated at the location of the particle at time 0, time the potential evaluated at the position. And this has to be balanced by a pressure gradient that you don't know, which is an unknown of the problem, in order to maintain the all motion volume preserving. That is, the all collection of the particle A should preserve the Lebesgue measure when the time evolves. So this is why you need the grad P. And this makes the problem non-trivial. Okay, so just this is a trivial derivation. So, but let's do it maybe to fix the notation. So starting from the Eulerian formulation and assuming that V is divergence free and let's say parallel to the boundary of the domain, then I can integrate the ODE forward in time, dx dt of equal to V of t and xta, starting from initial point A in the domain D. Then because of the advection equation, I see that the density field is frozen along the trajectory. So rho t of xta is the same as rho at time 0 of f0 of a, which is just rho 0 of a. And the next step is to see that the Helmholtz decomposition tells us that V is equal to minus rho grad phi up to a gradient in such a way that V is divergence free. So when you get this equation and you combine the two equations, you get back to this ODE formulation of the Muscat system. Of course, the pressure fields is a collective way of maintaining the volume preserving constraints over the fluid, over the domain. So this is the model. Okay, so now let me do a very simple remark that the Muscat system could be just seen as the friction-dominated version of the Euler equation of an incompressible inhomogeneous fluid, where I do the Boussinesq approximation, which would read in Lagrangian coordinate as the acceleration of the position of the particle is balanced by the force field given by the external potential phi, and you have the pressure field, which again maintains the map xt as a volume preserving map as time goes on. And of course, you can go from this model to the Muscat equation just by using the usual friction dominated trick by adding some friction, which correspond to the effect of a porous medium on a fluid, which makes the velocity very small, and therefore you can neglect the acceleration. So this, and we will go back to that at the end of the talk. So this is an important comment for my talk. Okay, so let's try to do some numerical approach to this problem. And here I'm going to use the so-called polar factorization of maps, which is just the nonlinear version of the Helmholtz decomposition of vector fields. Okay, so this is a result going back to the late 80s, and which was actually generalized in the Riemannian setting by Robert McCann in 2001. And so let me do the statement in the simple situation where D is just a compact convex domain in RD with Lebesgue measure L sub D. And then sorry, I used the wrong tool. So the theorem tells us that if you have a map, an L2 map from D going to the ambient space RD, and if you assume that the map is non-degenerate in the sense as the push forward of the Lebesgue measure by T is absolutely continuous with respect to the Lebesgue measure in the ambient space, RD. For instance, this rules out piecewise constant maps. Then T admits a unique factorization with two terms. The first one is a map that has a convex potential that I denote for simplicity by grad U, which is a little bit faulty notation from the geometric viewpoint, composed with a volume preserving map of the domain D. So U is a convex real valued function. So grad U, which is can be considered as a map from D to RD. And X is just a Lebesgue measure preserving map in the sense of measure theory. So I should emphasize that in the Riemannian setting, you would get the exponential of the gradients, so which is more meaningful from the geometrical viewpoint. But let me use this simple notation because it's simpler. So you can say that this map is a map with a convex potential. Okay. So why is it called polar factorization? Because in the simple situation where D is a ball and when T is just a linear map given by a matrix, then you have a factorization by two linear maps. The first one is actually given by a symmetric non-negative matrix. And the second one is given by an orthogonal matrix. So you recover the classical polar factorization of matrices. But I also say that this is a nonlinear Helmholtz decomposition because if you linearize this decomposition about the identity map, then you see that the composition will be, so you consider that T is the identity map plus a epsilon time vector field, and you do the decomposition, you will recover exactly the Helmholtz decomposition with first vector field, which will be a gradient, and the second one will be a divergence-free vector fields parallel to the boundary. So you can also see that as a nonlinear Helmholtz factorization or decomposition. And of course, in a more geometrical way, the Helmholtz decomposition is working on the Lie algebra of the group of diffeomorphism. And here you are more working at the level of the group and of the Lie group and not of the Lie algebra. Okay. But of course, you have to do that in a generalized sense. So here, X is just a measure preserving map. So nothing tells you that X is a diffeomorphism. So it could be a rather general type of map. Okay, so this strongly suggests the following uptime discretization of the Muscat system that you can see as a kind of projection method. So let me remind you of the Muscat equation written in Lagrangian coordinates. And then the idea is to, in the first time, to forget for a while within the time step delta t to forget the incompressibility constraints. So then you are left with a stupid dynamical system where the particles are just driven by the potential. And if you do an explicit Euler approximation of that, you end up at time n+1. But with this map, we are just doing this. And of course, when the potential is very simple, like the gravitation potential and grad phi is constant, this is an exact approximation, actually. It's completely exact. It's just what you would get if there was no incompressibility constraint. But of course, this map that we have just obtained has no reason to be volume preserving, and it is not even mapping D into itself. It could map D outside of D. So now the second step is to make the polar factorization of this map. And the first factor is a map with a convex potential that is written below, x squared over 2 plus delta t pn plus 1 x. So it's just a notation to recover at the proper scale the pressure field at the next time step. And the second factor, which is the one we are interested in, is the volume preserving factor, xn plus 1, mapping D to itself and preserving the Lebesgue measure. So in some sense, I have now defined my evolution scheme. I have a way to go from xn to xn plus 1. Well, of course, there is a slight caveat because there is the degeneracy issue, but let's forget about this issue, and in practice, it's not a problem. So this time discrete scheme is very easy to do at the discrete level when you discretize space. And in particular, what is remarkable that this discrete time scheme is a non-trivial scheme in the 1D case, which is a kind of paradox. When I started describing the Muscat equation, I was talking about divergent free vector fields. And so everybody knows that in a compact domain in 1D, and if you assume a vector field to be divergence-free and parallel to the boundary, it means that it's 0. So it's completely empty. So the model is empty at the Eulerian level. However, if you move to the Lagrangian description and you allow volume preserving maps that are not diffeomorphism in a major theoretical sense, then it makes perfect sense. And therefore, this approximation, this approximate scheme is perfectly meaningful in the 1D case. And in the 1D case, you have the possibility of discretizing the space by equal cells. So typically you have a unit interval and you divide this interval in small cells of equal lengths. And now, what is a volume preserving map at the discrete level? It's just a permutation of the cells. So in a funny way, you are back to the group description, but it's a discrete group, it's a finite group. So in some sense, if you start with the group of diffeomorphism, then you have to do the extension to volume preserving map, which is not forming a group. You have a volume preserving map that are not invertible. However, if you do a full discretization space-time, then you are back to the setting of groups. But of course, it's no longer a Lie group. It's discontinuous. And it's extremely easy to do numerics because the polar factorization in 1D is just the way if you have a finite number of real numbers, the polar factorization is just a way of ordering this finite number of real numbers in increasing order. And the permutation is just the way to put these numbers in increasing order. And you see the degeneracy occurs when you have two in the list of numbers, when you have two which are equal, okay? But in general, there is no problem. So you can consider that all these numbers are different and you have a unique permutation. So let me show you the slide with a numerical computation. And maybe let me zoom a little bit on the picture. So here, let me explain this picture. So the horizontal axis is the time evolution, and the space is on the vertical axis. Because I want to tell you that the space is a little bit like a one-dimensional column of a fluid. And the gravitation is acting vertically. So you have a vertical column of fluid, and this fluid has two different values for the density. On the yellow zone, the fluid is heavy. On the black zone, the fluid is light. And the red zone is a neutral zone where the density is in between. And now you let move the system by using the time discrete scheme I described before. And you do that at the discrete level with permutation. So it's a permutation scheme. And you can see the evolution of the system. And you can see that in the one-dimensional setting, the particle can cross each other. There is no problem. So which would be completely impossible in the classical setting. So they just cross each other. You see that the yellow phase fall down, the black phase goes up, and the red phase, the neutral zone, they had to make a compromise with the other phases. So they open the way, they give the way to the two phases in such a way that they can go up and down. But at the end of the day, you can see that the red phases, the people in the red phases, they are back in their original position. So for a while, the motion was disturbed by the inhomogeneity of the fluid, but at the end of the day, everything has been reordered in the stable way with the light fluid at the top and the heavy fluid at the bottom. Okay, and that's a super simple calculation you can do in few seconds, of calculation and few minutes of coding. Okay, so now let me go back to the next slide. And actually, with this idea, this has the suggestion to do a new formulation of the Muscat problem, which I call Eulerian Lagrangian relaxed formulation. So let me remind you of the equation we started with in blue. And now the idea is very simple and has been used in different contexts. So you introduce a measure, a non-negative measure attached to capital XT, and just defined to be the delta measure on the graph of XT. So this measure that is written for convenience of notation just as a function. Okay, so you can see that as a function of the time of the Eulerian variable little x and on the Lagrangian label little a. So it combines the dependence on both the Eulerian and the Lagrangian variable. And now you just do a stupid calculation and you see that for C, you get a self-consistent system of equation. And it turns out that the mathematical structure of this system is very simple. It's a first order pseudo-differential system of conservation laws where the time derivative of the measure is balanced by the divergence of this expression in X. And the pressure P can be recovered out of C by solving this elliptic equation involving the Laplacian of P. Okay, and why do I call that a first order pseudo differential system of conservation law? Because you see that grad P is obtained through a Riesz transform out of C, and therefore grad P is as the same order as C, and then it's a homogeneous first order system with a pseudo differential operator. And in 1D, this pseudo differential operator is trivial, so you can get rid of it in 1D if you want. Okay, so maybe it's very trivial calculation, but maybe it is okay. Before that, let me say that it's a little bit strange because we get a system of conservation law. So this is like more or less like a Hamiltonian conservative system, or, which is a little bit strange because the Muscat system is a friction dominated motion, and it is more often usually viewed as a gradient flow. And the gradient flow is more like a parabolic nature. So it's quite strange to see that the formulation we just obtain here is a conservative formulation of something which is in some other sense a gradient flow. But if you know a little bit the story about the Invisit-Burgers equation, you have a similar feature with the Invisit-Burgers equation. So it's a typical hyperbolic equation, but in some hidden sense, it's a gradient flow of something. Okay. Anyway, so let me just for maybe more notational purpose than anything else, to get used to the notation, let me just show you the calculation. So the first observation that this measure C, when this measure C is acting on function depending only on the Eulerian variable, like f of x, then by definition, you get the Lebesgue integral of f composed with xt. This is, you remember the definition of C was the delta of x minus capital xt. And therefore, because xt is volume preserving, you get back to the Lebesgue integral of f. So in some sense, this means that when you integrate C with respect to A, you get 1. Or if you want, you can see also that the marginal of C in the x variable is the Lebesgue measure. It's the same thing in a different wording. Now, if I compute the evolution of the measure acting on a test function depending on both Eulerian and Lagrangian variable, I use the definition here. Now I use the chain rule and then you see that the gradient of f with respect to x pops up. Then I use the equation written in Lagrangian coordinates. And now I use my definition again to express anything in terms of C. And I see that everything which involves xt of A is substituted for by the Eulerian variable now. So we get this simple formula. And this just means in a weak form that we have this conservation law I wrote before. Now the final step is to get the elliptic equation for P, But this is a very easy game because you integrate the previous equation with respect to the a variable. And we saw already that the integral of c with respect to a is just 1. So the dt term drops out. The second term gives us the right-hand side of the next equation. And now there is a beautiful cancellation because grad P doesn't depend on A. So this is a key point. The pressure doesn't depend on the label of the particle. And therefore, when you integrate this equation in A, you just get the integration of C with respect to A, and we get 1. And therefore, the divergence of the gradient gives us the Laplacian of P. So this is as simple as this. Okay, of course, it's a formal proof. Okay, so now this system of conservation law enjoys a remarkable property that if you look at the Boltzmann entropy, which I define here as just the integral with respect to A of C log C, this is a function of T and X which obeys an extra conservation law. Of course, this doesn't make any sense if C is a delta. But now we forget about the fact that we derived the equation by assuming that C was a delta. So this is what I call the relaxed equation. So now I'm considering C as a measure that can be absolutely continuous with respect to the Lebesgue measure. So that's the main trick. So we forget that in the past, C was considered as a delta, and we do this kind of relaxation which is very common in calculus of variation. So people call that Young's measures, or also in geometric measure theory, which is related to the concept of currents. So it's a usual business. And then we have an extended object. And then the Boltzmann entropy makes sense, can make sense. And it turns out that there is an extra conservation law for this convex entropy. And the convex entropy is clearly a strictly convex functional of the unknown C. And then in the framework of system of first order conservation law, there is um, a well-known general result that this makes the problem well posed, at least locally. So it means that you can symmetrize the system. And so if you are not familiar with this setting, so I recommend the lecture of the book by Konstantin Dafermos on system of conservation law. Well, here it's a little bit borderline because we have two peculiarity is the fact that a priori this is a continuous system of conservation laws. So A might be a continuous parameter. And on top of that, we have a pseudo differential operator. So it is not strictly in the usual framework, but it doesn't prevent the well-posedness. And for instance, if you want to consider a simpler situation where A is a discrete variable, and when you have one space dimension, then you are back to the classical framework of a finite number of conservation laws with a convex entropy, in which case it's clear that the system has this type of local well-posedness property up to technical details, of course. This is more like a principle than a precise statement. But anyway, this is a good evolution equation in some sense. Okay, so now you can use that at the numerical level, because if I go back to the previous equation and you make the label variable A discrete, it looks like a multiphasic flow. And therefore, we can use any kind of typical computational fluid dynamics method to solve that finite difference scheme. So no problem, especially in 1D, it's very simple to do. And you see that I can do typically a computation by using this formulation. And although it is a graph of the same type I did before, but I changed the color. So I made a joke between the color because the colors are, the difference is between the German flag and the Austrian flag. But you see that because I was giving the lectures in Munich and Vienna, so I made a silly joke about that. So here, on the German side, this is the purely Lagrangian scheme that I described with permutation. And here you have the Austrian version using the new formulation. And you see that the fits is perfect. It really, you get really the same result. So although apparently the formulation are quite different. Okay, and there are, there is a lot of mathematical analysis to do. And for instance, the fact that you get to the equilibrium state in finite time is not entirely clear to me. Why is it so? And this should deserve some, it's a kind of interesting mathematical statement to prove that you return to the equilibrium in finite time. So if you view that again as a kind of gradient flow, it's a strange gradient flow where you reach the equilibrium in finite time. So it's not like exponential decay or algebraic decay. You just get the equilibrium in finite time. And this would deserve further analysis to prove that rigorously.
But this could be related to the fact that it's a discrete system, right? I mean,
No,
maybe
yeah,
for
no,
continuous system.
no, because I mean, this is completely independent of the discretization. So I could run the calculation with zillions of points, a zillion of time step, and this would be an extremely stable calculation. Yeah. So it's absolutely sure that the result is correct, but it has to be proven. So it's not a rigorous mathematical result. Okay, so, oh, by the way, maybe in the case of two phases, you could rely on the theory of scalar conservation law, in which you could do some kind of a rigorous result. Okay, so let me show you now this picture in black and white. And so this is against the picture I showed before. And I would like to show you here you see the trajectory of the heavy phase and the light phase. And I didn't plot the neutral phase. Here, it's a special plot for the neutral zone, which was in red at the beginning. And you see that, except there is one exception, something went wrong for one particle, but you see that the particle, they really expand along the vertical column when time goes on in order to leave room to the other phases. And when the other phases have passed, have reached the final position, then you see that you get back to the initial position. So the neutral people, you know, they had been subject to the pressure of the heavy people and the light people. So they have to adjust for a while, but at the end of the day, they can go back to their original position. So you can, of course, do some social sciences or political interpretation of this kind of dynamical system. Okay, so now something funny also is if you remove the top of the column. So now you extend this column at on the entire real line, and you put periodically the heavy phase, the neutral phase, and the light phase on top of each other. And therefore, you can see that the heavy phase can fall forever. And then this is an output of the same phase coming from the next replica by periodicity. And of course, by doing this, you increase tremendously the mixing of the phases. And actually, they cannot stabilize in increasing order anymore. Well, this is obvious because you have a heavy and then it's funny to see that the neutral phase, well, they have to adjust forever. They cannot go back to the original situation. They have to expand everywhere because they are mixed with the all phases. And here you see that it is not so clear that you get equilibrium in finite time. So maybe in the periodic case, the equilibration takes longer, or maybe takes an infinite time. I don't know. So you see, this is maybe an answer to your question, Boris, that because I have unblocked the domain, maybe there is room for an infinite time for equilibrium. I don't know. I didn't try to do experiment, but of course it will converge certainly to an equilibrium. Okay, so now in the last part of my talk, I would like to make a comparison with the Euler equation, because don't forget that these Muscat equations are just the friction-dominated version of the Euler equation for an inhomogeneous fluid. Now let me go to the simpler setting of the homogeneous Euler equation. And of course, the Euler equation can be written in Lagrangian coordinates, as I did before. And actually, this is what, in some sense, this is what Euler did in his paper. So the paper by Euler in 1757 is just a calculation of the Eulerian formulation, but the starting point is really the Lagrangian description in the Euler paper. It's very clear. If you read the paper, it's absolutely clear. But people have a little bit of forgot about that. So now, some years ago, now it's almost, 20 years ago, I suggested a possible relaxed version of this equation, which is written here. So it's a little bit like the previous equation, but it's now a little bit more complicated because we still have this non-negative measure C, which has the same property to be to give 1 when you integrate with respect to A. We still have the pressure field depending only on the time and the space variable, but we have an additional velocity variable, which is related to the fact that we start from a second order ODE. So we need the time derivative somewhere of the position of the particle. And this provides a field V, which depends on both X and A. So it's not a standard Eulerian field because it depends on both the Eulerian variable and on the particle label. Okay, so this is a funny set of equation. So the formal derivation from Euler equation is just the same business as before. So very primitive calculation. So let me skip that. And the important thing is that these equations have a variational origin. And actually, there are optimality equations for a convex minimization problem space-time in the variable C, which is a non-negative measure, and the new variable CV, which can be seen as the momentum. V is the velocity and CV is like the momentum. And you minimize something once you prescribe the value of C at some initial time 0 and the final time 1, and I normalize the final time 1 to be the final time to be 1. And therefore, the quantity to minimize is very simple. It's just the avatar of the kinetic energy integrated in time, which is written as C times the square of the velocity. So this is integrated in X, A, and T. And on top of that, you have a constraint, which is the continuity equation that I wrote before. So this is an equation which holds true for every A. So for every label A, you have a continuity equation involving T and X. And we have the global constraint that when you add up this function C in A, you get 1. So actually the letter, I should have said that the letter C refers to the word concentration because it's like a concentration in the multiphasic description of a multiphase flow. And the total concentration is 1. So this is why I use the letter C instead of other possible letter. And the important point that this minimization problem is not a random problem. It's just the correct relaxation for a three-dimensional fluid of the minimizing geodesic problem in Arnold's formulation of the Euler equation. So I guess most of the people are familiar with this setting, but if you are not, maybe just remind you that in the famous 66 paper, Vladimir Arnold showed how the equation of Euler in the incompressible setting are just describing geodesic curves along the group of volume preserving diffeomorphism of the domain in which the fluid evolves. And these are geodesics according to the L2 metric put on the Lie algebra of the Lie group of volume preserving diffeomorphism, which is a set of volume of divergence free vector fields. Okay, and then of course you can formally find the equation, and this is correct. And also there is some rigorous analysis which was done in particular by Ebin and Marsden shortly later in 1970, which justified that in a classical setting. However, these results, in some sense, of Ebin and Marsden are very local. And in the large, this really truly amazing result of Sasha Schnirelmann, which was published in '85, shows that you cannot expect in the large to get minimizing geodesics in the classical way. So this doesn't work. And the analysis of Schnirelmann shows that you have a kind of microstructure which is developing when you are looking at minimizing sequences. So I don't explain the details. And this is completely compatible with the idea of relaxation by using a Young's measure or current ideas. And it turns out that in 3D and more, this is the right relaxation of the minimizing geodetic problem. So, and as a matter of fact, in order to see that this is the right relaxation, we have to use another remarkable result of Sasha Schnirelmann, which was proven 10 years later, which justify, in some sense, this nice convexification of the minimizing geodetic problem. So it is quite amazing that the minimizing geodetic problem, which has nothing to do with convexity, can be relaxed correctly into a rather simple convex minimization problem for which the optimality equation can be worked out. And once again, the impact of Schnirelmann on this result is absolutely crucial because there is a negative part which justified the use of a relaxed formulation, and the positive part, which is a density result showing that there is no gap between the infimum of the classical problem and the infimum of the relaxed problem. And I didn't put a slide on that, but I should tell you a little bit about the 2D case. The analysis of Schnirelmann in '85 pointed out that in two space dimensions, the group of volume preserving diffeomorphism is very special because this is related to symplectomorphism, and there is a topological obstruction to this relaxation technique in 2D. And actually, there is another paper of Schnirelmann, which was published in the book about around in the late 90s, which explained a very interesting strategy to deal with the relaxation in the two space dimension. So, of course, this is not a simple convex minimization approach as here. It's much more subtle, and the way Schnirelmann is addressing the problem is by introducing in 2D some braid structure and some brain topological constraints for the trajectory of the two-dimensional fluid motion. Because in 2D, if you look at trajectories, space-time, then you can get a three-dimensional braid structure, and you can add some additional constraint on this braid structure, and if you do, you can do some kind of relaxation approach, but this is much more subtle. And of course, you cannot get such a naive result as in 3D, getting to the convex minimization. However, from the physical viewpoint, you could also argue that restricting yourself to symplectomorphism in 2D is a little bit very rigid, because actual flow are really three-dimensional. So 2D approximation is just an approximation. So I think that the convex relaxation is still very relevant for fluids, in spite of this beautiful approach in the two-dimensional case, if you stick to the framework of symplectomorphism. Okay, so now let me give you some little bit of properties of the relaxed equation. So the really good news about this relaxed equation, that there is a definitely uniqueness result. So actually, the minimizing geodesic problem should not lead to uniqueness, right? Because even in Riemannian geometry, the minimizing geodesic problem may have pairs of points for which you don't have a uniqueness of minimizing geodesics. There are not so many of them, but this happens. However, in the RELAX framework, there is something that is definitely unique. It's the pressure gradients, which reminds you that the pressure gradients depends only on the time and the space variable and not on the microscopic variable A. And this guy is uniquely defined by the data at time 0 and time 1. And this is due to the convexity of the problem. And this is absolutely a remarkable phenomenon, which is due to the convexity of the RELAX problem, because you get actually, in some sense, it means that maybe you may have several minimizing geodesics, even in the generalized framework. However, the acceleration field is the same for all of them. So it is universal with respect to all possible minimizing geodesics once the endpoints are fixed. And therefore, the usual controversy against general solutions that they are lacking uniqueness is not relevant here. This is a perfectly well-defined object. And even if you stick with classical differential geometry, you cannot ignore the fact that this result tells you that definitely there is a unique pressure gradient. And now we have to go to the classical program of regularity theory. And actually, we obtain some partial regularity result and also some continuous dependence result with respect to the data by several people, including Ambrosio Figali and Emeric Barada. And I would say that the continuous dependence result trace back to the paper of Schnellmann, because in 85, Sasha was able to show some estimates comparing the geodesic distance to the straight line distance for the group of diffeomorphism. And this is a typical type of techniques that pops up when you want to do the continuous dependence. It's the same kind of ideas. So this paper is extremely rich. The 85 paper is incredibly rich. So now there is another remarkable property that has not been so much exploited so far, that when you go to the Boltzmann entropy, but here now it is integrated both in space and time. This Boltzmann entropy is a convex function of the time. So the time is between 0 and 1. So when you move along this generalized geodesic, the Boltzmann entropy is convex. So of course, in the classical setting, this doesn't make any sense, because C would be a delta, and therefore the Boltzmann entropy, you cannot see it. It's totally away from the framework. Doesn't make any sense. However, if you have really data that are well mixed, the C log C makes sense, and this is convex. And now I believe, so this is much more a belief than anything, not even a conjecture, that this might be a way of showing some kind of a non-negative Ricci curvature estimates for the group of volume preserving diffeomorphism in the spirit of the famous work of Lott, Shun, and Villani, where they explain how to express the non-negative Ricci curvature condition for Riemann manifold in terms of so-called displacement convexity of the Boltzmann entropy along geodesics of optimal transportation. So of course, strictly speaking, even formally, we cannot apply the result to this set, to the present setting, because in some sense, we should look at the set of probability measure on the set of generalized solution that I don't want to do. But I think there might be some shortcuts showing that directly from the Boltzmann entropy, we could get this non-negative Ricci curvature result. But it's just a vague conjecture. However, the fact that the Boltzmann entropy is a convex function of T is a real theorem, which was proven rigorously in the recent years by Lavenant, Barada, and Monsanjo. Well, there is a caveat, because actually, strictly speaking, I didn't say that, but the velocity field in the relaxed formulation should be is potential. So it is the gradient of some potential. So it's funny, because it means that you are generating at the macroscopic level divergence-free vector field as a superposition of gradient vector fields. Okay. Okay, let's say, sorry, I made mistake. So now the bad news is that this relaxed Euler equation are not very good in terms of Cauchy problem. And actually, they are very frequently ill-posed. And this is okay, it's not entirely true. So there is a tiny set of initial condition for which you get some kind of well-posedness through suitable formulation. And this is related to the famous Rayleigh condition in fluid mechanics and the Penrose condition for in plasma physics. So I don't want to explain that, but there is an entire field of works on that. And I put that in alphabetic order, although the very first work in this style were by Emmanuel Grenier about 20 years ago. But there was contribution of several people, including Claude Bardos, who is with us today. So the work of Bardos is not exactly related to this, but it's not this exactly, but it's related to this. So unfortunately, the ill-posedness is, so that these equations are not really good, I would say, if you want to think of turbulence theory in terms of the Cauchy problem. And let me illustrate that by a numerical computation. So now I switch to the Bavarian flag because this was in Munich, so white and blue. So then you have only two phases here. And so the heavy phase and the light phase, and the heavy phase, I just showed the heavy phase, so it's just dropping down. So I didn't show the trajectory of the light phase. And of course, this was in the Muscat case. But now I can do the same simulation with the Euler, the inhomogeneous Euler model. So it's a little bit unstable. However, we can do some computation, and you see that in the Euler setting, you get something which is much more turbulent because you have the splashing. So when the heavy, it's like a spring. When the heavy fluid is falling down, there is a kind of spring, and so a part of the fluid is coming back. So it takes a time. The equilibration is much more complicated and quite unstable. And you see the instability, you can feel that at the numerical level. So the details of this trajectory is not extremely precise. So quantitatively, probably this picture is not so accurate. So in some sense, you see that depending on your taste, you could like better the relaxed equation in the Euler setting because in spite of the ill-posedness, they provide something that looks like a turbulent behavior. Or if you are more on the safe mathematical side, where the relaxed equation for the porous medium fluid motion looks much more reliable, leading to well-posedness results and to a stable numerical computation. So this is more or less what I wrote in this, it is conclusions. So I just a rephrasing of what I just said. And so I think it's time to finish the talk. So let me show you a picture of a nice city, which is a little bit 100 kilometers away from Paris, that I discovered thanks to Sasha when he was visiting Paris. And he asked me, I asked, at that time I had a car, and I said, well, we can make a trip around Paris by car. And he told me, oh yeah, I want to go to Laon, L-A-O-N, and in French we say Laon, because there is a fantastic cathedral, and on top of that, the landscape of the city is very nice because the city is located on a hill like this. And so thanks to Sasha, I discovered this wonderful cathedral. And I think it is also a good way to a route to quantum chaos, because this picture taken from inside the cathedral is, to me, is reminiscent of some picture that you see in quantum chaos, right? And with this last picture, I would like to express my gratitude to Sasha and my great admiration to him. And happy birthday.
Thank you very much, Jan.